In a perfectly competitive market, the independent behavior of many producers making up the supply of a product and many consumers making up the demand of a product interacts to bring us to an equilibrium price and quantity of the product bought and sold. At the equilibrium price, P star, the quantity demanded and the quantity produced are exactly the same. And so exactly the amount that is produced and put up for sale is bought by the consumers. There is no shortage or surplus of the product. Now, there are a number of factors that could impact a market which would prevent it from achieving equilibrium. That is, prevent it from getting to P star and Q star. And if we can't get to P star and Q star, then we're in disequilibrium and we end up with a shortage or a surplus of our product, which is not very efficient. Here we're going to focus on the impact of a particular type of government intervention into the marketplace called a price ceiling to see how that would prevent the market from achieving equilibrium and see what kind of negative consequence we would get from that. Okay, so with a price ceiling, what the government is doing is placing a maximum price of what producers are allowed to sell the product for. So for example, they might set a price equal to, we'll call it P1, saying that producers are not allowed to sell their product for anything above P1, but they are free to sell it at anything below P1. Okay, in this case, the price ceiling in this particular market is non-binding because producers are still able to get to P star. They're still able to sell their product for P star, they just can't go above P1. And so a price ceiling, the way I've drawn it here, is going to have no impact on the market. The market's still going to get to equilibrium. However, suppose the price ceiling is below P star, so we'll call it P2. And this price ceiling is going to be binding, meaning it is going to have an impact on the market. It's going to prevent it from getting to its equilibrium. So this price ceiling means that the market can function below the line, but it can't get all the way up here to its equilibrium. It can't get up to a price that's as high as P star. Okay, and so let's see what the impact of this price ceiling will be specifically on the market. Okay, at a price of P2, the quantity supplied is going to be low because producers aren't going to sell as much of their product if they're not covering their cost of production. So here's our quantity supply, lower than our equilibrium. On the other hand, consumers really like low prices, and so at a price ceiling of P2, the quantity demanded is going to be way up here, well above the equilibrium quantity Q star. Okay, so clearly we have a disequilibrium. Supply and demand are not equal. Even though there's a really high demand for the product when the government imposes this price ceiling, the supply isn't going to be able to meet the high demand. And so this is going to be our limiting factor. This is how many transactions actually will occur in the market. Fewer than there would be in a free market situation without the price ceiling. In other words, this market is going to see shortages. Because there's going to be fewer economic transactions than there would be otherwise, the total surplus created in this market will shrink. So in a perfectly competitive free market, this entire triangle would represent the surplus generated. But with fewer transactions occurring, we're going to lose a big chunk of our total surplus triangle. So we're going to lose all of this. And this is what we refer to as our deadweight loss. Within the surplus that remains, this strange shape here, there's going to be some reallocation of surplus moving, in this case, away from the producers and towards the consumers. So the consumer surplus is going to be everything above the market price and below the demand curve. But in this case, the price has fallen through the government imposed price ceiling, and so the consumers are now going to gain away from the producers. They're going to take this surplus. So the consumer surplus won't just be the area above P star, but also the area above the price ceiling. So consumers are better off, but not all consumers are better off. The consumers who get to buy the product, so these guys, are better off because they pay a lower price. But note that there's several consumers, everything between here and here, who don't get to buy the product at all due to the shortage. So for consumer surplus, there's sort of this ambiguous effect. Some consumers are better off, but some are worse off. But from the producer side, producers are unambiguously worse off. So before, their surplus was everything below the market price and above the supply curve. Now, not only do they miss out on some surplus because they sell less of the product, but for the product they do sell, they now can charge only a lower price. So their producer surplus is limited to this much smaller triangle. A price floor is another type of price control that the government might impose on a market, and it's exactly the opposite of a price ceiling. So whereas a price ceiling tells the producers in a market the most they're allowed to charge for the product, a price floor gives a minimum permissible price to charge. So we might see this in alcohol markets, where the state might tell sellers of alcohol that they have to charge a certain price and they can't charge less than that price for alcohol. The reasoning behind it would be to reduce the consumption of alcohol by consumers. Now, if the price floor is below the market price, something like this, we'll call it P1, okay, then it's going to have no impact on the market. This price is the minimum that sellers can charge for the product, meaning that they're allowed to charge anything higher, including P star. As a result, the market's going to be able to move to its equilibrium, and so a price floor that's drawn as it is here will be non-binding. It'll have no impact. However, if the price floor is above the current market price, we'll call it P2, then it is going to have an impact on the market. The minimum price that producers are legally allowed to sell their product at is now higher than the original market price. And sellers like high prices, therefore they tend to sell more when prices are high. So we're going to see an increase in the quantity supplied with this binding price floor. Okay. However, consumers don't like high prices, and so we'll see them demanding a lower quantity when the price rises to this price floor. So quantity demanded will fall while quantity supplied rises, and we are clearly going to be out of our equilibrium. Okay, we're going to have more being provided than is demanded, and so we'll have excess supply of our product. Okay, this is really wasteful because all of this excess product that's being produced isn't going to be bought by the consumers. Only QD units of the product will actually be purchased. Okay. As with our price ceiling, under a binding price floor, because there are fewer economic transactions, there's going to be a loss in total surplus. Whereas in a free market, there would be this entire triangle of total surplus generated by all Q star transactions. Now we're going to lose a big chunk of that triangle. We're going to lose this whole area, what we call the deadweight loss. Okay, from the consumer side, the consumers are going to be unambiguously worse off. Okay, not only do fewer consumers actually get the product, okay, but the ones that do get to buy the product have to pay a higher price for it. So consumers are going to lose not only this triangle of surplus due to fewer transactions, but they're also going to lose this area of surplus due to having to pay a higher price for their product. So the consumer surplus is going to be limited to this much smaller triangle. On the other side of the market, on the production side, some producers are going to benefit from this price floor and other producers are going to be worse off. So let's start off with the negative. Many producers are going to be worse off because they're not able to sell as much of their product, and therefore we're going to see a loss in producer surplus equal to this triangle here. Okay, however, amongst the sales that do occur, so for the producers that do get to stay in the market, we're going to see an increase in producer surplus. For the transactions that do occur, the producers now get to sell their product at a higher price. And so we're going to see a reallocation of surplus moving away from the consumers and towards the producers. Producer surplus will increase by this rectangle in addition to the original part of producer surplus they were keeping.